Hey boys and girls, so welcome to part 2 of our video for habitats. So you will need the following materials, of course a pen or pencil to write with, and then your science packet. So yesterday we had talked about aquatic aquatic habitats, aquatic habitats, which were basically all about water, right? So these are types of areas that are filled with water, and they were either described as being very still, or they moved. They all have fish, right, in them living there. So today we're going to be looking at terrestrial habitats. So turn to the back, and you'll see you have terrestrial environments. And terrestrial, the word terra, that word means earth or land. So when we talk about terrestrial environments, we're talking about environments or habitats that are on land. And there's a bunch of them, right? So think to yourself when I say these words. We have desert, grassland, rainforest, the forest, and there's two types of forests. There are the coniferous and the deciduous forests, mountains, and the tundra. So all of these are land or terrestrial habitats, and we're going to take a look at the animals found there as well as what these places look like. Okay, let's take a look at some of these terrestrial places. So here we go. Here's terrestrial habitats. Some of them have water, but most of it is land, as you can see. Okay, so let's take a look at the first one. We're talking about deserts. Take a look at that. Very dry, sandy. I don't see any water in sight. Look at how dry it is right here. Look at that. Very, very dry. So if we take a look at our chart here, for the desert, we're talking about very, very vast areas of land. Vast is just another word for large. So large, vast areas of land. Okay, there's sand, lots of sand and rock. Can be either extremely hot or extremely cold. And hot, so dry and hot. And there's very little rain that falls here. So very little rain. As well as very few plants. Very few plants. So I'm going to put few plants. Let's make sure I put a little box here so I know that it's meant for deserts. So not a place where it has a whole lot of anything. Okay, and I think you saw some of the animals that lived here, right? We saw the camel, lots of camels. We do see some lizards. Okay, probably snakes. Look at this one. This is a great one. There's some desert tortoises, some fox, vultures, and other types of hawks and eagles. So let's go ahead and add that to our animals found there. So we have camels, snakes, you have lizards, you do have some birds, right, that live there. Birds, scorpions are definitely a type of invertebrate that lives there. And then I also saw the desert tortoise, right? Which is just kind of like a huge, huge turtle. Okay. Now on to the grasslands, though. The grasslands, beautiful, right? It's a large open area covered with natural vegetation or grass. So there's more plants that grow in the grasslands. And here I'm going to actually show you the grasslands. So look Look at that. Lots of vegetation, lots of grass. That's why it's called grasslands, right? Very flat. There's not very much mountains, unless it's like way in the back here. There we go. There's another thing of grasslands. Here's some animals that we see in the grasslands. So what do you see? Some lions, right? We got more animals of the grasslands. Here's a great one. So we know then, from just looking at these pictures, that a grassland is a large, flat land covered with grass and natural vegetation. And natural vegetation just means plants. Okay? Plants that nobody grew, right? So there's some trees, but not a lot. Pause the video if you need to. And the animals that are living in the grassland, we saw those lions, right? I'd say the elephants, cheetahs, Kaylee, there you go. You know where your animal's habitat is. Zebra, giraffe. And let's do one more. I'm going to do the rhino. All right, the rainforest. When I think rainforest, I automatically think this word. Jungle, right? It is a jungle out there because it is. It's like a very dense, very thick forest. It's like covered, just covered, and it's called the rainforest because there's a lot of rain, right? So let's take a look at some of those pictures of the rainforest here. Look at that. Dense, dense forest, just covered. There's vines, there's leaves, there's trees, there's all kinds of plants just coming out of all over the place, right? So, oh, there's a great picture. Beautiful. So, right here for rainforest, we're talking about lots of rain in this area. It's a very thick and dense forest. And there's these things called leaf canopies. And what that just means is that there's so much trees and so much vegetation in these places that there's this canopy, kind of like a shading, if you will. And that natural shading is caused by all the plants that are in the rainforest. It causes this natural shade in the rainforest. So it almost looks a little darker down below the leaves, down below the canopy. Okay? Now, when I think rainforest, of course, I think of my baby, the sloth, right? The sloth lives here, along with monkeys and gorillas. Of course, there are lots of snakes here. And usually when I think of snake, I think of like constrictors, right? So not the ones that bite you, they're the ones that wrap around and then squeeze the life out of its prey. We see tigers in the rainforest, as well as lots of different types of tropical birds. If you've ever seen the movie Rio, that takes place in a rainforest. And that's because it's located in a place called the Amazon rainforest. I'm not talking about Amazon where you order stuff. I'm talking about the actual rainforest. It's called the Amazon. And it's one of the largest rainforests that we have here on Earth. So that is the rainforest. Jorge, I imagine that your white tiger is probably found in the rainforest. Okay. Let's talk about the forests. There's the coniferous and the deciduous. And there is a difference between the two. So the forest, let's just talk about a forest in general. It's just a large area of land covered with tons of trees and plants. Now it's not as dense, meaning like super filled, like a rainforest is. There is some like areas of flatter land, right, in a forest. Okay, so there's still lots of trees. It's a large area covered with lots of trees, plants, and undergrowth. And undergrowth is basically just all the stuff that grows on the ground. I'm talking about like mushrooms and moss and fungus, all that kind of stuff. It's kind of weird, but it's pretty cool, okay? So when I talk about the deciduous forests, I mean these kinds of forests. These are the types of forests that have trees where the leaves fall off and change color, okay? But the coniferous is quite the opposite. We're talking about pine trees and evergreens. So like your Christmas tree, if you celebrate Christmas, these kinds of trees stay green all year round, and they just stay like this even through very drastic weather change. So if it gets really cold, it's still nice and green, whereas in the deciduous, they'll lose their leaves and fall off and change color. Okay, so that's the difference between the two. So what kind of animals do we find in these sort of forests? I'm thinking automatically like deer, right? Squirrels, rabbits, moose. Have you seen a moose? It kind of almost looks like a reindeer. Moose, there are things like turkeys in the wild, chipmunks. We have animals like the groundhog or a mole. These are types of animals that live underground in the forest. Again, pause where you need to fill out your chart. Let's take a look at the mountains. Mountains, one of my favorite places, because look at how beautiful that is. It's an area with high elevations, just means high off the ground, and extremely cold temperatures. Okay, so the higher we are off the ground, the colder it actually is. Okay, the colder it is. So we're talking about very steep means really, really tall, okay? Steep and tall hills. Sometimes they have peaks, which is the very, very top of the mountain, and it's isolated, meaning it's kind of all alone. No one really lives on the mountains. We live nearby a mountain, but no one actually really lives in the mountains, so it's very isolated, not much living there, okay? This right at the top is the peak, okay? So when we look at our pictures of a mountain, look at that. Unbelievable shots, right? And we can see that even if it's really nice and green and looks warm and sunny down here, it's actually colder up in the mountains. So that's what we know about mountains. Now, when we think about actual animals that live on the mountains, of course, there is this one particular animal called the mountain lion, right? We also know it as a cougar, okay? Mountain lion, and there are mountain lions here in the Central Coast, you guys. Bears live in the mountains, so Anthony, okay, you'll be looking at a bear. We do have goats that live on them, or they're known as the ram, right? Rams. There's also sheep and elk. Now that is what a reindeer is, elk, and of course moose. Oops. And you can kind of see that some of these things, some of these animals all sort of live in kind of similar habitats. So as you can see though, the forest is really kind of near the mountain. We see that when we look at like pictures like this. We can see forests and then mountains in the background. So two habitats kind of colliding together. And finally, the most extreme of all is the tundra. The tundra, we're talking about a very, very, very cold region. Very cold region, okay? So usually doesn't have a lot of plants or plants growing there, almost treeless sometimes. Here's another shot of what the tundra could look like. So very snowy, right? It's a vast area of land that's flat. I'm trying to hurry. It's usually frozen with few plants. Okay. So when we think of these places, we're talking about polar bears, right? And Arctic, all kinds of Arctic animals, like the Arctic fox or the Arctic owl, right? Caribou, type of a moose. And those are the types of animals you would see in the tundra. Make sure you copy this down.